Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Teardown. Today we're going to be talking about the Lemokey G1. Now this mouse was supposed to be Keychron or Lemokey's first flagship gaming mouse, but as I talked about in my full review, this mouse has a lot of very disappointing aspects to it, and those disappointing aspects continue here with the overall serviceability and repairability of the G1, as Keychron has made a lot of questionable decisions in terms of the design here with the G1 that make this unit very difficult to service. Comparing it to the older Keychron mice like the Keychron M2, the G1 feels like a couple steps back in terms of serviceability and overall design, very much like the rest of this mouse feels, where it's a couple steps forward in terms of some areas, but it's also a lot of steps backwards. But before we get into it, I did want to say thank you to Lemokey and Keychron, who was kind enough to send over the G1 for review. I greatly appreciate it. And as always, this video will be fully subtitled and timestamps are available down in the video description, so if you're looking for a particular topic, you can go ahead and find that down there. And if you enjoyed the teardown of the Lemokey G1 and want to see more mice taken apart like this, be sure to leave a like on the video and get subscribed to the channel. Now, as always, before we do any teardowns, you will need a couple things to do these. First off, having a precision set of screwdrivers is going to be very helpful. It's going to make this teardown a lot easier if you have these smaller little bits, so having one of these is recommended. It's also recommended you have something like an ice cube tray or just something to keep track of your screws. I like to use an ice cube tray, but you can use pretty much whatever you want. And it's also good to have a microfiber cloth to help keep the mouse in place while you do your teardown. But once you have all that, you are ready to go ahead and tear down the Lemokey G1. Alright, now to start off, the first thing we're going to do is we do have to remove the stock skates on the bottom of the mouse to gain access to the 4-axis screws here, 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 and here. Now I've already gone ahead and removed the stocks, and I have the ESP Tiger Yanzi dots on here, and I have removed the ones I need to, but you will need to remove the stock skates to open the unit, which is honestly probably a good thing because the stock skates, as I talked about in my full review, are pretty bad. So we'll go ahead and get started. We'll go ahead and remove these 4-axis screws. All right, now one thing you may notice here is that the back of this mouse is pretty bent up here, and that is because there is actually a clip connector on the inside here that you need to stick a screwdriver in order to open it. Now, unfortunately, it doesn't actually work that well, so a lot of the time when you stick this in here, you're going to break the honeycomb material towards the back of the mouse, which is very unfortunate. But in order to get the unit open, you have to do this. Now, what I recommend doing first is trying to get the sides of the mouse open because the back doesn't really like to open naturally. So I'd recommend just kind of getting your fingernail into the side of the shell wherever you can. And I'd recommend opening up the side of the unit first. And then once you get the side of the unit open, then you can go ahead and take your screwdriver, put it in towards the back and press up. And with the right amount of tension, you should be able to unclip it. And then you can just run your finger along the side and it should come off. As you can see here, there is the clip there. There is its housing and there's the bent plastic. This is just a really bad design. I don't know why Keychron decided to put a clip on the back of these, especially because it has 4-axis screws. There's no reason to do this aside from making the unit harder to service and easier to damage the bottom shell. So I don't know why they did this, but that is something to look out for if you are going to take this apart. Now, once you get the shells apart, there is a ribbon connector here on the side of the mouse. So you can go ahead and just take 2 of your fingers, pull the sides of this up, and you can pull the connector off just like that, nice and easy. So that is how you get the top shell and the bottom shell off. A little harder than usual on previous Keychron mice because this clip here, again, I don't know why they put this on here. This makes no sense, especially putting a clip connector so close to honeycomb material is really dumb because this is just going to break immediately. Don't know why they did that, but it is what it is. So we'll go ahead and put the base aside for now. We'll talk about the top shell first. All right, now the top shell of the G1 is pretty straightforward. First off, we have the side button PCB, so we'll go ahead and remove those first by removing the access screw here and here. And then once that's out, we can grab the side of this PCB and just pull up, and the side button PCB comes off just like that. So we do have a double clip sided ribbon connector, which is nice to see. So if this cable does get damaged, it is easy to replace. And we have the Wano white dot switches here for the side buttons. We'll put this off to the side for now. Next up, we can go ahead and remove these side buttons. So pretty similar process as usual. We're just going to press in from the sides, and these will actually just pop right off almost immediately. They are anchored into these tiny little ridges here, but you can actually just push them out of the shell if you push deep enough into the side of the mouse. So these come off very, very easily, which is nice to see. Next up, we can go ahead and remove the main click. So we'll go ahead and remove a screw from here and a screw from here. And then once those are removed, we can go ahead and just put our finger behind the clicks, and these pop out very, very easily. Probably the easiest main clicks to remove from the mouse. They basically just fall out once you remove the screw, which is a little concerning, but that is how you remove the main clicks. Very, very easy to do so. All right, well, that is pretty much everything for the top shell of the G1. Not really too much to talk about here. So we'll put this off to the side for now, and then we'll talk about the base next. Now, the base of the G1 is rather unique, as you can see, because we have a battery just kind of chilling in the middle of this. So the battery for the G1 is literally just taped to the top of the board. Now I have removed the battery once to see what kind it was, so I may have not put it back into the shell, but this is just kind of how it's put in the mouse, which is mildly concerning. But regardless, we'll go ahead and disconnect the battery first. So we're just going to go ahead and get our fingernails on the side of this little connector here and wiggle that off, and you can pull it off. And then you can gently just lift the battery as a whole off of these little adhesive pads. Try and be gentle with it, and you can just lift them off of the adhesive pads and it just comes off in one piece. There is also this black cover on the battery. I'm not really sure why that's on here because it's a solid shell mouse, so it's not like you're going to see the battery through the top shell, but regardless, that's there. On the plus side, it is very easy to mod a smaller battery into the G1 because this thing is pretty heavy. So this is unintentionally a nice thing to see because it does make it very easy to mod the battery. But regardless, the actual anchoring is a little sketch, but that's okay. Alrighty, and then next up, we can go ahead and remove the 4 screws that are going to be anchoring in our main board. And then once those are off, we can go ahead and remove our main board. Now there are standoffs here for the scroll wheel, so you do need to just pull the board straight up. So what I would like to do is grab by the side of the main clicks and just pull straight up, and it will come out of the shell just in one piece like this. So we'll put that off to the side for now. And then in terms of the base of the G1, there really isn't too much going on here. There is a slider switch here for the power switch on the bottom of the unit here. This little switch will most likely fall out during our teardown, so I'm going to take it out. We'll put it back in later, but this other switch should stay in place and that shouldn't be too serious of an issue. And then lastly, we have the main board itself. So we'll go ahead and remove the scroll wheel. Very easy to do so. We're just going to grab the scroll wheel by the side, grab the encoder, and just gently pull, and it will come right out of the encoder. Nice and easy. And then now that we have the main board out of the unit, we can take a look at what is on the board itself. So first off, we have the Pixar 3950 sensor. This is the first Keychron mouse to utilize this sensor. And as I talked about in my full review, the implementation is actually very good. We also have a very unique MCU choice, as this is using the Realtek 8762G MCU. This is the first time I've seen a Keychron mouse use a Realtek MCU. Normally they're using Telelink or Nordic, and this is the first time we're seeing this one. This may be why the power efficiency on the G1 is so poor. I'm not 100% sure, but it is definitely a very unique MCU. It still does perform very well, but the power optimizations is definitely a little lacking on this one. Then we also have our main buttons here, which are the Wano blue shell pink dot switches, these standard switches we've seen in all of the Keychron mice. We also have an F switch 11mm S encoder, which is the same encoder type we've seen on pretty much all the Keychron mice. That's nice to see here. And then we also have this very, very unique scroll wheel switch here. Now, big thank you to the whale on Twitter who was actually able to help me ID this switch. This is apparently a level 3 TTC switch. It just has a very unique branding on it, but he was able to find similar switches that were for sale on, I think it was Alibaba or AliExpress, that have the same thing on them. So they are a TTC switch of some variety, at least based off the information I got from him. They could be a different switch, but regardless, it is just a level 3 switch, which is a very unique way of doing so. Normally we see standard box switches like this on a little bit of a higher mount, but this is like a standard box switch that's on the level of the PCB, but with also like this little height adjustment here. Very odd in terms of its implementation. I've never seen it before, but the scroll wheel click does work decently well, as I talked about in the full review. Well, that's pretty much everything for the disassembly process. Now let's go ahead and weigh all the individual pieces next. So first we have the base without the USB-A dongle included on the bottom, but with the cover and the bottom base button, and those parts are weighing in at 8.7 grams. Definitely there could be a little more done here in terms of weight reduction on this base. I'm sure you can cut this piece out because this is probably going to drop the weight by a gram or so. There is some other stuff they could have done as well, but it is a decently weight optimized base. Definitely a little more work that could be done to it though. We have the top shell, which weighs in at 11.78 grams. The scroll wheel weighs in at 1.78. We have the main clicks themselves, which weigh in at 4.2 grams. Side buttons, which weigh in at 1.14 grams. Side button PCB, that weighs in around 2.3 grams. Battery, the 600 milliamp hour battery, that weighs in at 11.36 grams. If you drop this down to a 300 milliamp hour battery, you can probably cut yourself off 6-ish grams to the overall weight of the mouse. So that is one way to bring the weight of the G1 below 50 grams. So definitely something that would be considered. Again, it will heavily impact the usage because the battery life is pretty poor, but that is something to consider. And then lastly, we also have the MCU itself, which weighs in around 9.74 grams. And then we also have around a gram-ish in terms of miscellaneous screws and other smaller parts of the unit. Alrighty, and now that we've gone ahead and weighed all the individual parts of the G1, we can go ahead and start our reassembly process. Alright, so first off, we can go ahead and put our scroll wheel back in. So how you want to do this is you want to take the thin end of this scroll wheel and put it into the hole in the encoder, that kind of brown thing there. So just go ahead and line it up gently inside the encoder. You may have to rotate it once or twice to get the alignment correct, but once you get it right, you can just push it into the encoder just like that. And then once that's done, we can go ahead and put the main board back into the base, but in order to do so, we have to deal with this slider button on the bottom that fell out earlier. So what you have to do with this tiny little button is you have to take this button with this little ridge here, this little kind of cutout piece. You want that to be facing inward on the board, so facing in towards the sensor like this. You want to put it into the bottom orientation here. And then on the bottom of the G1's board, what you want to do is you want to take this little switch here, as you can see on the side of the board here. See how it says Bluetooth, USB, and then 2.4 gigahertz? You want to take a screwdriver and push this down to 2.4 gigahertz like that. And then just double check that this is on the bottom, again corresponding to 2.4 gigahertz. Make sure it's set all the way to the bottom. And then what you want to do is you want to take your board, line it up over the top using the scroll wheel as a guide. So you want to just put it over the top, roughly just like this. Like that. And you want to line it up, and you may need to shimmy the board around a little bit to make contact. And then once you fidget around, you should be able to make the board level. As long as the board is flat with these little plastic standoffs you hear, you should be okay. Now, before you screw everything in, go ahead, take your finger, put it on top of the sensor and push into the board, flip this over, and just make sure this bottom control switch still works. If this switch isn't oriented properly, you can pretty much break this switch immediately, which will render your entire unit inoperable. So make sure you set this to 2.4 gigahertz on the bottom, and make sure you set that bottom switch all the way to the bottom as well to 2.4 gigahertz, so you can make sure you line it up properly when you put the board back in. Now that that's done, we can go back and put in our anchoring screws for the main board. Now when you put those screws in, just put your mouse on a flat surface and make sure the screws aren't over tension, there's no wobbling to the base, but if there's no wobble, you're good to go. And then lastly, we can go ahead and put our battery anchoring back in. Now this is the sketchiest part of this repair as a whole, because if there wasn't this little piece here, they could have anchored the battery properly or put a battery on top of this, but because they wanted to put such a large battery, we have this very sketchy way of installing this. Now to do this, you literally just take these adhesive pads on the bottom and just slap it on top of the PCB. It is probably the sketchiest way to install a battery I've ever experienced on a mouse, but here we are. Orientation doesn't really matter because it's just going to stick to the sensor anyways, so like there isn't really a bad way to do this. You just want to make sure it doesn't shake or anything when you take it off, but definitely the sketchiest way of installing a battery I've ever seen. I do not like this. I would have much rather seen them put like a 300 milliamp hour battery and take this piece out and put it here so it actually would anchor itself properly, because this is going to come loose over use and over time, but it is what it is. And then next up, we can go ahead and put back in our tri-tip connector and just pop that into this hole here and press in on the sides. And then what I recommend doing once the battery is connected is flipping your unit over, going to the bottom, turning it off, and then turning it back onto 2.4 gigahertz. Make sure this light turns on, and just make sure your mouse actually works. So plug it into your computer, verify that everything is still working, verify your main clicks are working, your sensor is working, your main clicks. Just check everything before we move on. But if everything is functional with the mouse and you're good to go, we can go ahead and turn the unit off, and we can go ahead and continue with our teardown. Next up, we'll go ahead and talk about the top shell next. Now the top shell is going to be pretty straightforward, as with a lot of top shells are. First thing what we have to do is we have to go ahead and put back in our main clicks. Now in order to do this, see this kind of hollow part of the main click here? That has to go over this little stabilizer that is right here, just like this here. Now you may notice there's actually no foam padding on these connectors at all. It's just raw plastic. That is partially why the main clicks do feel a little rough sometimes, because there's no padding inside of these. It would be nice to see Keychron add some kind of foam layering here to kind of dampen the main clicks to make them a little less sharp, but it is what it is. Now to do this, what we're going to do is we're going to take the bottom of this click, we're going to put it in through this hole in the bottom. We're going to flip the unit over, and you want to line up that standoff and stabilizer as I talked about, push that over, and once that's done, this should be roughly lined up. You can just take your thumb and press down on the main click. Now, because the main clicks are so loosely installed, they'll probably anchor themselves as far down as they can just naturally, but just make sure to give them a good press to make sure they're down all the way. We'll do the exact same situation with the next click, so we'll go ahead, take this end, put it into the bottom here, flip this over, line it up with the standoff over the top, and these will click into place, and we'll press down just like that. And then that. And then next up, we can go ahead and put back in our anchoring screws for the main clicks. Now, as I always say with main clicks, be extremely careful, because if you over tension the main clicks, you will break your main clicks. So just screw these in until you feel a little bit of resistance from the screw. Do not over screw them, because you will break your main clicks. And then we'll do the exact same situation on the next click. We'll make sure that it's fully anchored down, it's not loose, and then we'll go ahead and put back in the anchoring screw, and that's all done. And then next up, we can go ahead and put back in our side buttons. So all you have to do is literally just take the main clicks and just roughly line them up into place and just put them over on these connectors and just stuff them down. That's it. It's very easy to do. There's no like pin connector or anything. You just literally stuff them down and pray they're going to go into place, which is a little sketchy, but it does the job. Next up, we can go ahead and do our side button PCB. Now you may notice there's a bit of an extended part here that does correlate with a small little standoff in the bottom here. So you can see how there's like a little bit of a gap right there. This little extended part of this board does have to go in there. So this can be a little finicky, but basically you just want to roughly line it up in the side of the board, just like that, slide it into place. And then once you get it over the standoffs, just press down with your fingers and that will roughly land these standoffs into place. Nothing too serious there. And then we can go ahead and put in the anchoring screws for the side button PCB. And then that is pretty much everything for the top shell. That's done. Now, once those anchoring screws are in, before you move on, I'd recommend going on the side of the unit and just verifying that your side clicks still actually actuate, still make sure they actually have a click to them. If they do, you should be good to go. Now that that's done, we can go ahead and reconnect the top shell to the base of the G1. Now you don't need to hold the shells like I'm holding them, just because I'm trying to show you guys how to do this. But basically you just want to take the ribbon cable and you just want to make sure it goes into this little connector here, roughly just like that. And then once you have it roughly lined up, you can go ahead and take your fingernail on the side and just gently press down. You want to make sure the ribbon connector is roughly even. That's like the biggest part of this. And then once that's done, just verify it's in as much as it can go, and then just clip down the sides of this black connector and you're good to go. This is unnecessarily difficult because this giant battery is in the way of the connector, so it makes it very difficult to do this. It's just a pain in the ass. I don't know why Keychron decided to do it this way. It doesn't really make a lot of sense. It's kind of over-engineered, but it is what it is. And then with that done, you can go ahead and put back the shell. Now the shell is pretty straightforward. You basically just roughly line it up on the bottom of the mouse like this, and clip it in, run your finger along the side of the mouse, and that is pretty much everything for that. And then you can go ahead and re-anchor all your base screws. Alrighty, and then once those screws are back in, that is everything. You have successfully taken apart and reassembled the Lemokey G1. Overall, a fairly disappointing mouse in terms of its overall serviceability. Keychron has made the actual manufacturing of this mouse a lot more complicated, and again, this bottom clip just doesn't make a lot of sense because it's right next to this honeycomb texture, so the moment you try and open the back of the mouse, this is going to break immediately. It just doesn't make a lot of sense. This included USB-A dongle storage, makes no sense. The way the battery is anchored inside this mouse is very concerning because it's going to come loose over time. There's just a lot of very questionable things here with the G1, which is really sad because the last mouse Keychron released, the Keychron M2, was an extremely serviceable mouse that I love. This mouse, this is my daily driver work and editing mouse. This thing is a fantastic mouse, and it just feels like Keychron took like 7 steps back in terms of the overall construction. Sure, the performance is better on the G1 than it is on the M2, but the G1 is a harder to service unit, and it just doesn't really make a lot of sense compared to the success that Keychron's old mice have had. And as I talked about in my full review, the G1 is supposed to be Lemokey's first flagship or like true gaming mouse, and a lot of the mistakes they've made on previous Keychron mice are still here, and there's a lot of new mistakes, especially with the battery implementation, that just don't really make a lot of sense on this mouse. So while the mouse is semi-serviceable, it's not going to be nearly as serviceable as the old Keychron mice, which is very disappointing to see. Overall, this is just a very disappointing unit as a whole. But that's going to be everything for this episode of Teardown. Thank you very much for watching. As always, I greatly appreciate it. If you'd like to support what I'm doing here on the channel, making teardown guides for all the mice I cover here, you can become a member here on YouTube. It is only $2 Canadian a month, and that is the best way to directly support the channel. You can also use code MELON with a 0 over at Lethal Gaming Gear, Mechkeys, Potent Gaming, TJ Exclusives, and a couple other brands to save yourself some money on your orders and help directly support the channel. But that's going to be everything for today's episode of Teardown. Thank you very much again for watching, and I'll catch you all in the next episode. Peace.